Welcome by the third podcast about MBT group session.
I am so glad we are getting into this today because this material is just incredible.
Right. I want you to imagine sitting in a room where every polite fiction of your daily life is just suddenly stripped away.
Mhm.
You aren't allowed to rely on small talk or just nod and pretend you understand someone when you really don't.
Exactly. And the most terrifying part is you aren't allowed to ignore that sudden, sharp spike in your own chest when someone across the circle says something that inexplicably enrages you.
Yeah, you actually have to pause, hold that feeling up to the light, and dissect it while six other people watch you do it. That is the raw, almost unbearable tension of the environment we are examining in today's deep dive.
It really is. We have a transcript in front of us from a live mentalization-based treatment, or MBT, group therapy session. And looking through these pages, what strikes me immediately isn't the psychological jargon.
No, it's the sheer exhaustion of the people in this room. We are talking about individuals who feel chronically, agonizingly misunderstood by the world.
Yeah, they're sitting in a circle trying to learn how to translate their internal chaos into something another human being can actually comprehend.
But before we get into the specific clashes in this transcript, I think we need to establish what this space actually is. Because reading this, it doesn't feel like a standard support group where people are just, trading war stories.
It's really not a standard support group at all. A traditional support group is often focused on the narrative of the outside world, right? People come in, they report on the bad week they had, the terrible boss they dealt with, and the group provides comfort.
Right, they say, oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you.
Exactly. But an MBT group is fundamentally different. It operates as a living, high-pressure laboratory.
So the goal isn't to solve the problem with the terrible boss.
No, not at all. The goal is to observe, in real time, the psychological machinery that activates inside the room when that story is told.
Because the core of this idea of mentalizing, is basically a dual processing task. From what I understand in the notes here, mentalizing is the active, conscious effort to simultaneously map your own mind and the mind of someone else.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
But I want to push back a little on how clinical that sounds, because in practice, it seems almost impossible. If someone insults me, my heart rate spikes, cortisol floods my system, and my only thought is either to attack them or leave the room.
Right, your survival instincts kick in.
Yeah. So you're telling me that in this specific therapy, the expectation is that a person in that state of physiological panic is supposed to pause and say, I wonder what complex underlying fear motivated that insult.
Well, yes, that is exactly the expectation, and is precisely why this treatment is so grueling. Because when you are under threat, and emotional threats trigger the exact same neurobiological responses as physical threats, your amygdala hijacks the brain.
So your prefrontal cortex, the part that handles logic and nuance, just shuts down.
It essentially goes offline, yeah.
Yeah.
You drop into a pure survival state. Mentalizing is the act of forcing that prefrontal cortex back online while the alarm bells are still ringing.
Wow.
It is the practice of staying intensely, stubbornly curious about the internal state of yourself and the other person, instead of just surrendering to that automatic survival reaction.
Which brings us to the therapists in the room. In the transcript, there are two therapists facilitating this group, but their behavior is completely counterintuitive to what you'd expect.
They aren't acting like referees.
Not at all, and they certainly aren't acting like life coaches. There are moments here where the group is actually having a smooth, agreeable conversation, and the therapist deliberately interrupts it to point out a microexpression of tension.
Yeah, they seem to function entirely as the brakes of the group.
Right, the brakes. I love that analogy.
It's the perfect mechanical description because the therapists are not there to accelerate the group toward a solution.
Yeah.
In fact, they view quick solutions with immense suspicion.
Because a quick solution usually means someone is avoiding the actual emotion.
Exactly. When the group gets caught up in the superficial details of a story, the what happened, the therapists hit the brakes and pivot to the how and the why.
So if a misunderstanding flashes across the circle, they just stop the dialogue immediately.
Yeah, they will say things like, hold on, notice what just happened to your posture when he said that. Or, let's pause, what is the feeling in the room right at this exact second?
They are forcing the participants to look at the relational data they are normally completely blind to.
Right.
I look at it like, imagine watching a movie where the dialogue says one thing, but the subtle emotional subtitle track says something completely different. Today, our mission in this deep dive is to read those subtitles.
I like that, reading the subtitles. And those subtitles become violently erratic right from the start of the session, specifically with a participant who is caught in this massive battle with his workplace.
Right. This first major conflict we see illustrates exactly how external trauma invades the therapy room. So we have this one group member who is currently navigating the occupational health and reintegration system.
He has been out of work due to severe mental health struggles, and he is trying to return.
And the bureaucracy is just crushing him. He's dealing with case managers, company doctors, HR protocols. And, we've all dealt with corporate red tape, but the language he uses to describe this is extreme.
This is very intense.
He doesn't just find it annoying. He tells the group that he is experiencing a half panic attack with every single phone call and email.
Yeah, he characterizes the people managing his case as deeply incompetent, hiding behind forms, and showing zero genuine interest in his actual existence as a human being.
Right, and if we only listen to the audio track here, the surface level, we might just agree with him. I mean, corporate systems are notoriously cold and inefficient.
But the therapists aren't interested in critiquing HR?
No.
They're looking at the mechanism of his panic. Why does an email from a case manager trigger a full physiological panic attack?
Because reading the subtitles, the underlying telemetry shows a profound existential fear of losing his autonomy.
Exactly. It's not about the forms. It's the fact that the system treats him as an object on a conveyor belt. He's being told to conform to a timeline that completely ignores his fragile emotional state.
And treating a human being as an object, I mean, that is the definition of dehumanization.
It is.
Yeah.
And for someone whose nervous system is already severely compromised, being objectified isn't just frustrating, it is interpreted by the brain as an annihilation threat.
Wow. An annihilation threat. So it's life or death to his nervous system.
Yes, when your autonomy is stripped away, your survival instinct dictates that you must fight back with whatever weapons you have available.
And this participant is highly self-aware of his weapon of choice. He uses this incredibly vivid visual metaphor to describe his defense mechanism.
He calls it the porcupine.
Right. Yeah, the porcupine, or in Dutch, the stikkelvarken. He tells the group that when he feels the system pressing down on him, when that panic rises, he emotionally rolls up into a tight ball and points his spikes outward.
What is remarkable about his disclosure here is his awareness of the intention behind those spikes. He isn't just protecting himself passively.
No, he actively decides to make every interaction as painful as possible for the other person.
He does.
And I have to stop right there, because looking at the transcript, this is where my empathy for him sort of hits a wall.
How so?
Well, he openly admits, I am going to make sure this interaction is painful for them, because it's painful for me. And from the outside, that doesn't look like a defense mechanism. That looks like a guy choosing to be vindictive and deliberately toxic to some HR worker who is probably just trying to do their job.
Right, you're looking at the impact of his behavior.
Yeah. I mean, why should we, or the group, view this as anything other than abusive behavior?
That is the exact friction that projective identification creates. You are experiencing the natural reaction to his spikes. You feel poked.
Definitely.
But to understand the clinical reality, we have to look at the mechanics of that projective identification. It is not a calculated Machiavellian plot to be cruel.
It's not.
No, it is an unconscious, desperate offloading of intolerable emotion. He is so overwhelmed by the helplessness of being objectified that his psyche simply cannot contain the pressure.
Okay.
The only way he can momentarily survive that pressure is to force the other person to carry it for him.
Oh, wow.
If he can behave in a way that makes the case manager feel entirely helpless, incompetent, and frustrated, then for a fleeting moment, he is no longer the helpless victim. He has transferred the emotional poison into them.
So the spikes are basically a psychological syringe. He's injecting his own feeling of powerlessness into the other person so he doesn't have to feel it.
That is a brilliant way to phrase it. Yes.
Yeah.
And while it is incredibly destructive to relationships, we really have to recognize the sheer crushing weight of wearing that armor.
Right, because there's an incredible exhausting loneliness in having to constantly maintain those spikes, isn't there?
The tragedy of the porcupine defense is the total isolation it guarantees. And the participant acknowledges this. He tells the group that he chooses the isolation of his spikes because the only alternative he can imagine is being put on a chain.
He literally views compliance as slavery.
Exactly. It's either total combat, bleeding everyone who comes near you, or becoming a submissive dog on a leash. Those are the only two realities his brain can compute right now.
Which is a classic trauma response, right? That Black and white binary thinking.
It is. And notice the precise intervention of the therapists here. They do not validate your initial reaction of, wow, this guy's just being mean.
Right. They don't scold him for being difficult with HR.
But they also don't coddle him. They hit the brakes and ask a strictly mentalizing question. They ask, is there any space between the absolute submission of the chain and the full-blown attack of the porcupine?
They are challenging his binary reality. They are asking him to locate the gray area.
Yeah, they want him to see that middle ground.
But when your amygdala is screaming that you are about to be put on a chain, looking for a diplomatic gray area probably feels like dropping your shield in the middle of a battlefield.
It feels like suicide to his nervous system. His nervous system simply will not allow him to explore that middle ground. And, we don't have to guess about whether his nervous system is hyper-aroused.
No, because we see the consequences of it play out live, instantly, right there in the therapy circle.
Exactly. This is where the transcript gets incredibly tense.
Yeah, we move from him complaining about people outside the room to a direct collision with someone sitting like 3 feet away from him.
Right. Another group member has been listening to this entire saga about the HR department, and this second participant clearly relates to the struggle. He genuinely wants to help.
Yeah, he leans in and starts offering tactical advice. He suggests specific workarounds, explains how the company doctor actually outranks the case manager, and offers a practical roadmap to beat the bureaucracy.
It reads like a classic moment of peer support.
Right, if you are only monitoring the audio track, it is absolute support. But the telemetry in the room immediately goes haywire.
Because the porcupine's spikes go up against the guy trying to help him.
Exactly.
We have to look at the neurological state of the porcupine. He is already highly activated. He has just spent 10 minutes reliving the trauma of his lost autonomy.
Right, so his brain is on fire.
Yes. In that state, the prefrontal cortex cannot process logical, practical advice. What his paranoid, hypervigilant system registers is not a friend offering a map.
What does it register?
It registers another human being telling him what to do, how to act, and how to navigate a system he hates.
Oh, wow. So the advice sounds identical to the control he is fighting.
Exactly. It echoes the exact systemic pressure he is raging against. The helpful participant unwittingly stepped into the role of the oppressor.
And the porcupine just snaps. He shuts the other participant down and says flat out, I don't need a babysitter.
That specific word, babysitter, is a massive piece of telemetry data.
It really is. It tells us everything about how he is organizing the interaction in his mind. Because a babysitter is an authority figure appointed to watch over a child who cannot take care of themselves.
Right. By offering advice, the second participant made the porcupine feel infantilized.
He felt small.
Yes. And the moment he felt small, the spikes deployed to make him big again.
I want to look at the advice giver for a second here. Because in the real world, outside of an MBT lab, if I see you struggling and I offer you my hard-earned advice to save you some pain and you call me a babysitter, I am going to lose my mind.
Of course you would.
My immediate reaction is going to be defensive anger. I'm going to say, fine, drown in your own problems, see if I care. The instinct to defend one's own good intentions is incredibly strong.
And that is exactly how a casual conversation devolves into a destructive conflict in everyday life. The advice giver feels his generosity has been attacked, so he counterattacks.
Right.
But we also have to mentalize the advice giver here. Why do we give advice so quickly when someone is in pain?
That's a good question. I mean, usually we think it's to help them.
Often, it is not actually to help them. It is to soothe our own anxiety.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Sitting with someone who is in deep, intractable pain is highly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
We want to fix their problem so we don't have to feel the discomfort of their distress anymore.
Wow. So the advice giver is also reacting from a place of mild anxiety, trying to control the room's emotional temperature by solving the puzzle.
Precisely. You have two people operating from unconscious defensive postures. And this is the exact moment an MBT therapist is trained to strike.
And they do. The therapists do not let the advice giver defend himself, and they do not let the porcupine continue his attack. They completely halt the content of the discussion.
They stop the talk about company doctors and HR forms completely.
Yeah, one of the therapists cuts through the tension and asks the group, what is happening right now in this moment between you two?
It's a brilliant pivot.
It is. They strip away the camouflage of the HR story and point directly at the live ammunition on the floor.
They are moving the group from content to process. The content, the HR stuff, is irrelevant now. The process, the fact that A well-meaning peer was just transformed into an oppressive babysitter within 30 seconds is everything.
Right.
The therapist is essentially holding up a mirror and saying, look at how quickly the battlefield was recreated right here in this safe room.
It is a stark demonstration of how trauma distorts reality. When your internal alarm system is broken, an outstretched hand offering a lifeline looks exactly like a hand reaching out to choke you.
It's a tragic misinterpretation.
And this concept of a broken internal alarm system leads us directly into another devastating interaction in the transcript, because we shift focus to a different group member who is dealing with an entirely different kind of battlefield, and that's his own home.
Right. This participant is 48 years old, and he is engaged in the terrifying process of trying to rewrite his fundamental behavioral code.
He talks about trying to build a new you after nearly half a century of operating under a rigid defensive posture.
Which involves a massive neurological cost. You're trying to forge new neural pathways while your brain is desperately trying to route traffic down the old familiar highways.
Yeah, it's exhausting. And he shares a story with the group that highlights just how dangerous that process feels to him. He had recently finished a highly emotional, draining one-on-one therapy session. He goes home, and he decides to take a massive risk.
He decides to be entirely vulnerable with his partner.
Yes, he tries to share the raw, unfiltered emotion he is processing.
He deliberately lowers his armor, he steps out from behind his lifelong defenses, and asks his partner to hold his vulnerability.
And the response he gets is just catastrophic. Instead of receiving his emotion, instead of comforting him, his partner shifts the focus.
She looks at his current emotional struggle and compares his behavior to the behavior of his own father toward their son.
And we have to pause and understand the psychological weight of that comparison. For someone in deep therapeutic work, trying to break generational cycles of dysfunction, being compared to the architect of your own childhood trauma is not just an insult.
It is a nuclear strike on the psyche.
It completely shatters him. He describes his reaction to the group, and again, the imagery is so striking. He says that the moment she made that comparison, he retreated into an old-fashioned foxhole with a helmet, shooting at everything that comes near.
The foxhole is his version of the porcupine spikes. It is a rapid, violent ejection from what clinicians call the window of tolerance.
Let's break down that mechanism.
Yeah.
Because window of tolerance sounds like a gentle buzzword, but the biological reality of it is violent, isn't it?
Very violent. The biological reality is entirely governed by your autonomic nervous system. The window of tolerance is that optimal middle zone of arousal.
Right.
When you are in the window, your sympathetic nervous system, which acts as the accelerator,
Yeah.
and your parasympathetic nervous system, which acts as the brakes, are in balance.
So you can feel intense emotion, but you can still think critically.
Exactly. Your prefrontal cortex is engaged. You can mentalize. You can hear an insult and say, that hurt. Why did you say that? Instead of throwing a chair.
But when a trigger is too severe, like being compared to an abusive parent while in a state of naked vulnerability, what happens?
The sympathetic nervous system floods the body with adrenaline and cortisol. You are blasted out of the top of the window into hyperarousal.
Wow.
The higher brain shuts down completely. The reptile brain takes over. And there is no nuance in the reptile brain. There is only predator and prey.
So in the foxhole, his partner ceases to be his complex, loving, flawed wife. She just becomes a hostile target.
Yes. And the only directive in a foxhole is to return fire.
Reading the transcript of how the rest of the therapy group responds to this story is absolutely fascinating, because the porcupine participant, the guy who was just fighting everyone about HR, he immediately lights up.
He aligns completely with the guy in the foxhole.
Yeah, he validates the anger. He openly calls the partner's comment a low blow. You see this rapid, intense group cohesion form around mutual anger at the outside world.
Group dynamics are incredibly powerful, and they can be incredibly dangerous. What we're seeing here is the seductive drug of pure validation.
Right, because think about the chronic loneliness these individuals live with.
Exactly. They constantly feel like they're speaking a language no one else understands. And suddenly in this room, someone says, you are right. Your reaction is justified. The world is cruel to you.
The relief of that validation must be immense.
It is.
But there is a catch. If I'm reading the therapist's subtle interventions correctly here, they're actually trying to break up that solidarity.
They are.
But why? I mean, if these people finally feel understood by each other, why would the therapist interfere with that bonding?
Because bonding over a shared defense mechanism is a trap. It is called collusion.
Collusion, okay.
If the group simply validates the foxhole, they're confirming his binary worldview, which is that the world is entirely dangerous and the only safe place is behind a gun.
Ah.
They're essentially climbing into the foxhole with him and handing him more ammunition. That is not therapeutic at all. Validation without mentalization just reinforces the pathology.
So the therapists have to thread this impossible needle. They have to acknowledge the genuine pain he is in without validating the foxhole defense.
All right.
And they do this by steering the group toward a massive recurring theme in the transcript, which is the sheer, soul-crushing exhaustion of the empathy gap.
The empathy gap is the space between what we feel internally and what the world perceives externally.
And the participants in this group voice a deep, visceral frustration with this gap. One of them complains that he feels he has to be 580 million% clear about what he needs, while his loved ones seem to make absolutely zero effort to intuitively understand him.
I think anyone listening can relate to that frustration, the idea that if you truly loved me, you would just know.
Yes, the illusion of transparent intent. We suffer from this incredible cognitive bias where we believe our internal emotional state is somehow radiating out of our bodies like heat, and that anyone who cares about us should be able to feel it.
But it is a complete illusion. Human beings are terrible mind readers.
There is a devastatingly simple example of this illusion discussed in the session. A participant recalls a time he was in bed with his partner. She was crying, and she physically turned her back to him.
And what did he do?
He tells the group that he just lay there and did nothing. He didn't reach out. And later, she was deeply hurt that he didn't comfort her in her distress.
Right.
But he explains to the group that, in his mind, turning away is the universal signal for, leave me alone, I need space.
It perfectly illustrates how we project our own coping mechanisms onto others. When he is overwhelmed, he withdraws and needs space.
Right.
So when he sees her withdraw, his brain maps his own operational code onto her behavior. He lacked the telemetry data, the subtitles, to understand that her turning away was actually a desperate, silent plea to be held.
He wasn't being malicious. He was literally misinterpreting the data.
Exactly, and this is the heavy lifting of MBT. The therapists step into this frustration and deliver a very harsh truth. They remind the group that just as they cannot read the minds of their partners cannot read their mind.
Which means the burden of translation falls on them.
It falls on everyone. But yes, it means you cannot rely on silent intuition. You have to do the agonizing, risky work of vocalizing your internal state.
You have to explicitly provide your own subtitles to the world.
Because the outside world is fundamentally blind to your internal reality.
But when you are exhausted, providing those subtitles feels impossible. It's almost like trying to learn a new language. You know, you finally get the courage to speak it to a native speaker and they mock your accent.
Right.
The immediate instinct is to never speak it again. And we see the result of that exhaustion in the transcript. When faced with the empathy gap, the default reaction for many of these participants isn't to try harder to communicate.
No, it is absolute withdrawal.
Yeah, one participant essentially declares, fine, I'm done. I'm just going to write people off. I'm not going to share any of my therapeutic journey with her anymore.
Withdrawal is the ultimate absolute defense mechanism. The porcupine uses spikes to keep people at a safe distance. The foxhole uses aggressive return fire. But withdrawal simply erases the other person from the equation entirely.
Wow.
It is a preemptive strike against disappointment. If you expect nothing, if you share nothing, you can never be misunderstood again.
But you also guarantee your own profound isolation. I mean, you survive, but you are completely alone in the dark.
Exactly. And that is why the climax of this session is so remarkable.
Because it doesn't end in the dark. It doesn't end in withdrawal.
No, it leads to one of the most difficult cognitive pivots I've ever read in a therapy transcript.
We return to the man in the foxhole, the one reeling from the comparison to his father. He does something extraordinary. He demonstrates the entire goal of MBT, live in the room.
He initiates the process of stepping out of what he calls his animal brain.
But how does he actually do that? Because you said earlier that when you are in hyperarousal, the logic center is completely offline. How do you reboot a system that is currently on fire?
It requires immense conscious friction against your own instincts. In the transcript, you can see the cognitive steps he takes. First, he has to recognize the physiological state he is in.
Right.
He acknowledges to himself, I am in the foxhole. I am in a survival state. Just naming the state begins to engage the prefrontal cortex.
Okay, so that's step one.
Then instead of focusing on the impact of his partner's words, which is what triggers the pain, he forces his brain to focus on her intent.
He asks himself the single hardest question you can ask when you are bleeding. Why did she fire that shot?
Yes. He forces himself to mentalize his enemy.
He separates the devastating impact of her words from the intent behind them, and as he analyzes her perspective, he has this massive breakthrough.
He realizes that her comment wasn't a calculated attempt to destroy him.
No, he realizes she was looking at him through the lens of her own maternal panic.
Precisely. She was looking at her husband's intense emotional instability, and her own sympathetic nervous system was triggered. She felt a protective, primal fear for their son.
She was terrified of generational trauma repeating itself.
Yes. Her comment was clumsy, poorly timed, and deeply hurtful. But the telemetry data driving it was fear, not malice.
She wasn't trying to hurt him, she was trying to protect the child. And realizing that changes the entire architecture of the conflict, doesn't it?
It dismantles the foxhole. Because you cannot be at war with someone who is acting out of maternal terror.
But we have to be clear about the cost of this realization. Mentalizing her fear doesn't act as a magic eraser for his pain.
Not at all. It doesn't mean the comment didn't hurt. He still felt entirely unseen in his moment of vulnerability.
Right.
Mentalizing does not neutralize your own emotions. What it does is stop the escalation. It stops him from returning fire and destroying the relationship. It transforms a catastrophic fight into a moment of tragic, complex understanding.
And as he discusses this breakthrough, he brings up a really dark irony about the process of healing. He notes that as he gets better at this, as he stops blowing up, as he starts pausing and mentalizing instead of firing from the foxhole, it actually freaks out the people around him.
It is a well-documented phenomenon in family systems theory. Systems operate on homeostasis. They crave predictability, even if that predictability is toxic.
So his partner, his family, they have spent 48 years learning the choreography of his chaos.
Exactly. They know exactly how to handle the guy who screams and storms out. They have built their own defensive structures around that specific version of him.
It's sort of like a complex mobile hanging from the ceiling. If you pull one piece down, the whole thing shakes violently.
That is a perfect mechanical metaphor. When he suddenly changes his weight in the system, when he pauses, breathes, and responds calmly, the MOBA shakes. The system doesn't know how to absorb this new data.
Because his sudden emotional regulation actually dysregulates his environment.
Yes.
Which means the people who love him most might unconsciously push his buttons, trying to trigger an explosion just to get the old him back. Because the old him, as destructive as he was at least familiar.
Familiarity feels like safety to the nervous system. The new you is a stranger, and strangers are threats. This is the hidden tax of psychological growth. You don't just have to manage your own resistance to change. You have to manage the anxiety your growth causes in everyone who loves you.
It requires a level of stamina that is just hard to fathom. Looking at this transcript, I am left with a profound respect for the courage it takes to sit in that circle.
It is the ultimate crucible. The work of MBT is the grueling, daily, minute-by-minute choice to catch your own defenses before they deploy.
It is feeling the porcupine spikes threatening to pierce the skin and choosing the vulnerability of the chain.
It is feeling the safety of the foxhole calling to you and choosing to climb out into the open field without a helmet.
It is choosing the agony of curiosity over the comfort of combat, and that changes how you view every interaction outside of that room. So we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you navigate your own complex systems today. The next time you find yourself utterly infuriated by someone, the next time you feel your own internal spikes rising because a colleague sent a passive-aggressive email or your partner completely missed the emotional mark, can you force your prefrontal cortex online?
Can you hit the brakes?
Exactly. Can you step back from the blinding audio track of your own offense and ask yourself, what invisible terror, what unmet need, or what desperate attempt at control is driving their telemetry, even if their delivery feels like a direct attack on you?
Because if you can locate that invisible fear in the other person, you aren't just reacting anymore, you are mentalizing. And that is how you change the system.
Thank you for listening to this group session episode of the MBT podcast. Don't forget to follow us to stay updated on new episodes where we continue to explore what it means to mentalize within yourself, in relationships, and within the group.